Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Mile High Game Guys Board Gaming Podcast. I'm your host, Adrian.
I'm Zach.
And I'm Jeff.
And returning to help us review this week is Katie from Katie's Game Corner. Hi, Katie.
Hi, everybody. Hello.
Welcome back.
Welcome back.
Yes, it's
3
been
days later.
so long.
Yeah, I haven't spoken to you in ages. How are you doing?
We are all doing fantastic. So we are all here to do a review. This is another review episode. And the game that we are going to be reviewing is the classic two-player game, Twilight Struggle, former #1 overall on BGG.
For many years.
Yep.
Until Pandemic Legacy reared its ugly head.
And there was the great BGG
Debacle.
voting shenanigans, but neither here nor there. So yeah, Twilight Struggle is a 2005 game from designer Anada Gupta and Jason Matthews. A whole bunch of different artists, and it was published by GMT Games. It plays 2 players and takes 120 to 180 minutes. Zach, got a rules rundown for us?
Sure. So in Twilight Struggle, you will be playing out the Cold War from the perspective of the United States or the USSR. Over 10 rounds, you will be playing cards to influence countries around the world. Playing a card to conduct operations will let you add influence to adjacent countries, strip your opponent's influence with realignment rolls, and attempts to replace their influence with yours with coups. You can also play a card as an event if it matches your nation, but watch out, your opponent can use the event off of your operations card if it matches their nation. Luckily, playing a card to the space race will let you use the card without activating the event. Finally, the scoring cards will award points to players based on their influence in specific regions, but if someone has control of Europe when it scores, they will automatically win. After the 3rd and 6th rounds, mid and late war cards are going to be added, and that will be giving you more events to play. And the game will end early if any player gets 20 victory points, or if their opponent drops DEFCON down to 1. Otherwise, after 10 rounds, you will score all regions, and then whoever has the most victory points wins.
Yeah, so that's Twilight Struggle. Sounds simple, but there is a whole lot that goes on in this game.
I mean, it is a simple enough game to play once you
understand what's happening.
Well, once you move it down to its essentials.
Yeah.
I would recommend everyone look at the board for this game as you listen to this podcast.
Yeah, it'll help visualize a lot of things we're going to talk about.
Yes.
Or you can just look at a map or globe.
Yeah,
thing.
it's basically
Just
the same thing.
Make sure it's, circa like 1950s, 60s, 70s.
I have a map from 1. Will that work?
No.
Year
It's
1?
pretty
No?
much the same map.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
It just, there aren't a lot of lines to indicate countries, but it's still the same land masses.
Anyway.
Krakatoa is probably still there.
So, to start this off, let's talk briefly about kind of what our initial thoughts were going into this game. I think for all of us here, though, it's going to be a little bit different because this was a game that we all played before we started really reviewing games. So, Zach, would you like to start? Because you're the first person I know who had Twilight Struggle.
Yeah. So I think when I looked at Board Game Geek and I saw that it was #1 for the longest time, and I had heard a lot of interesting things about it, I was like, ooh, it's about the Cold War. I haven't heard a game that has done that. So it seemed like a unique game at the time, theme-wise. And so I ended up buying it, I think when it was on sale or something like that. And yeah, I was like, oh, this is the #1 game on Board Game Geek. Let's see what that's all about.
Right on. Jeff, what about you?
I had seen this game in stores and knew from Board Game Geek it was like the #1 thing. I did not end up playing it for quite some time until we were over at Pork Chops watching UFC. Everyone was playing the other 7 Sins, and then we were like, let's play Twilight Struggle. And that was my very first introduction to the game.
Okay. Katie, what about you? Do you remember kind of like what you were thinking the first time you heard about or got to sit down and play Twilight Struggle?
It's the first kind of war-style game that I ever played, accidentally. This is like 4 years ago, so it's quite recently compared to everybody else. But I've still played it a lot. But I was at a small convention in the UK, and I'd seen on BGG that it was top of the list for so long. I didn't really know much about it, but there was a copy in the bring and buy, and it was pretty cheap. So I thought, go on, we'll see what it's like. Everyone's raving about it. played it going in blind, not really knowing anything about the game, and then just became obsessed with it.
Right on.
Really interesting fact.
I think I played it for the first time probably about 4 years or so ago. It would have been right around when Zach got it, because like that was where Zach and I's like friendship kind of was early forming. We met up a few different times to play Twilight Struggle at one of the old places we used to go to for game night, and I enjoyed it like pretty much from the start. You know, I don't really remember what was going, like I didn't have any real major thoughts about it. Like it was early enough in my gaming history that I wasn't like researching games, so I didn't know it was #1 on BGG. I didn't know that it was really highly rated. Like I think Zach was just like, hey, I've got this 2-player Cold War game. And I was like, sure, yeah, I'll sit down and, you know, fight each other over the Cold War. Sounds cool. And yeah, that was kind of where I was going into it. So let's talk a little bit about the components in Twilight Struggle. I think you pretty much have to start any conversation of Twilight Struggle with, oh god, the chits. There's a lot of chits.
There are 280 cardboard chits in the current edition, I believe. I'm sorry, 260 cardboard.
Yeah.
Full color counters.
Yep.
Which, you know, isn't a huge amount by like war game standards.
Or roads and boats.
Yeah, roads and boats, like 1,200 chits. But especially like, you know, for where I was in gaming when I first played Twilight Struggle, it was like, holy crap, there is so many pieces here. They're pretty solid pieces. I played Paul's copy a couple times last week, and the first time we went to play it, he hadn't even punched his copy, so I actually got to punch a copy of Twilight Struggle in preparation for this review.
He has the 2015 one, right? Or 2016? Yeah. Do you know any differences between
I
the
did not notice a
Okay.
single difference.
Okay.
Anything since the 2009 edition, the deluxe edition doesn't really change anything.
All right.
Yeah.
Because I know when me and Paul were playing today, he was like, look up the differences between the ones we have because it's 2012. And I was like, I didn't find anything.
Yeah. I think they might even just throw like years on there for no reason.
They want to up that copyright.
Right. But I think the components are all really solid. It's got a really big board that's divided into a ton of countries. Most of the countries on the map. I mean, they're not all there, like, but it,
I don't know, just the way you said ton of countries, just for the map, for a map. Yeah, sure. Okay. For a map of the world. Yeah, there are a lot of countries there.
yeah,
All the lines are there, but not every country is represented with its own influence track.
Yes.
Which, yeah, and the game board is basically just a giant map of the world, and it's different colors divide up the regions, like North America, South America, Africa. Asia has a subsection that's Southeast Asia, and then there's Europe that's split into East and West Europe.
Yeah, and it's all by colors too, so it helps with like the scoring things. I know when we first opened that up, we hadn't really seen a 2-player game that took up like had that big of a board or anything like that, and so when we first opened it, we're like, oh, holy shit, that's a lot of real estate.
It's a
lot of stuff.
Yeah.
8-fold board.
Yes, that would be an 8-fold board.
Yeah. Ripe for the breaking in half, Adrian.
Oh my goodness. Never going to live that down.
And it's your copy now, so.
We're talking about dominant species specifically.
Yeah.
It comes with its own coffee stain in the top left of the board.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting design choice.
Yeah. I will say for GMT's boards, I really don't like the fact that it is the 4 folds that also has the fold at the end.
Yeah.
Because
it's really fragile.
It can be really fragile because, like we were just saying, Adrian had ripped my copy of Dominant Species at the time because it's the same style board where he accidentally grabbed it in the wrong way, and then all the weight on the other side dropped straight down, and then it was a clean rip.
Yeah. Thankfully, the rip didn't like really ruin anything. It just, instead of being,
it's now 2 boards.
Yeah, it's 2 boards instead of 1.
That has happened to me with a GMT game as well. So
yeah. So that's something to be a little bit aware of when you're folding up and unfolding this game. Otherwise, the board quality I think is really solid. It's good, like thick quality board. I don't know. I have no issues with color blindness, but I know like some of the colors on this are very similar, especially like Europe. The East and West Europe are different shades of the same purple. Asia and Southeast Asia are like different shades of like an orangish kind of like dark orange and light orange. I don't know if any of that gets to be an issue for colorblind people, but otherwise I think everything on there is really clear and easy to tell like what spaces are what. It's just understanding what you do with all those spaces that gets tricky.
It doesn't go crazy with art, but I still think it's sort of utilitarian, but in a good way.
Mhm.
It looks like a finished game. It doesn't look like a prototype.
Right.
Was that a jab at 18xx
Yes, it
games
was.
there, Zach?
Absolutely
Okay.
a jab.
100%.
Yeah, Ant made a similar joke just
Yeah.
last night.
Yeah.
It also has a substantial amount of cards. I mean, it's
110 cards.
I mean,
two
like
decks
compared
worth of
to
cards. Again,
legendary encounters, I think that has a little bit more.
okay.
or compared to Terraforming Mars.
Exactly.
It's got a reasonable amount of cards.
There you go.
But they are quality cards. It's really easy to tell like which ones are Russia cards, which ones are America cards, and which ones are like the neutral ones that can go either way.
Yep, it's just based on the star. If it's red, it's USSR. If it's white, it is US. And if it's both, then it's both.
Yeah, very easy to clearly tell. The scorecards are very clearly marked scorecards,
Yep.
which is important because scorecards are the only cards you can't possibly hold on to until the next
Mhm.
round. Other ones you can kind of,
Do they say on the actual cards if they can be held or not?
may not be held
The big,
Okay.
giant, bold red thing at
Okay,
the bottom.
good.
of the scorecards.
Yeah. That's one nice thing about GMT cards is that, they have all the information you need on there, but like not in a way that it just seems like you're missing something.
Yeah, it's informative.
Yeah, it's informative, but it doesn't take away from like any visuals or anything from the card, I think.
Right. Yeah. I could say, like, after having punched it, like Paul's copy just the
Mhm.
other day, I can understand why some people who really get into wargaming and stuff buy little, like, special clippers for their chits to clean up the corners so that they don't have little dangly bits
Yeah.
from punching it out.
I would
But
say
have you ever tried to clip corners? Do you know how long that takes?
I have not, and could imagine it taking forever and being way too tedious, but I can understand why some people might feel that's worth
Yes.
the time.
yeah,
Sorry.
tedious. That's the war gamers like wheelhouse right there.
Zach just trying to alienate more and more of our fan base.
That's what I do. I would say the only downside is if you don't sort out like those chits at the beginning, because the majority of the chits are either the USSR or the US ones that have numbers from 1 to 7, I want to say.
10.
Yeah.
I
And
think
that
you go, like, up to 10.
Yeah, it goes up. Okay, but I know in the beginning, I remember I sorted them, but like when I played with Paul earlier today, like we just put them in a big pile, and it's like, oh, I'm up. I'm upping the influence of this one from 4 to 5. I gotta fucking find a 5 somewhere in this pile.
Big pile of chits.
Yeah,
Yeah. I can't really think of anything that I would say is really negative about the components. We mentioned the minor thing about like the way the folds in the board are, but even that, like, it's not a
no,
detriment by any means.
it's just personal experience.
Yeah.
So
All the art style's pretty basic, like
Yeah.
the space race stuff. It's just,
Yes.
Bold colors.
a lot of any of the pictures are basically just pictures from the past, but I think that works for the game because it's telling it's trying to tell.
A historical
yeah.
like, story.
Yeah.
They all very clearly fit the theme. Yeah. Katie, you got anything you want to add about components?
Yeah. I think sorry, I really can't get my words out at all now, and I love this game. Components can seem quite overwhelming, and if you're quite new to this style of game, I think how actually the simplicity of the map really works. I know a lot of Euro gamers like all the fancy artwork and really intricate maps, but I feel like in a game where you've got so many decisions, just being able to see a really clear map is really helpful. People kind of moan to me all the time that the board's really basic, but I think it's actually really helpful to be like that as well. I know you were saying there was nothing wrong with it anyway, but that's kind of my thought on it, especially for people that might be turned off the game because it does look the way it does, which is the case in. What am I trying to say? Yeah, words. There you go.
No, I mean, I would definitely agree with that. That
Yeah.
it is definitely functional, but my thing is that they still have a form to it. There is still some sort of art in there at least. So
It really does fit in with the theme, though.
exactly,
And,
yes.
GMT are very good at being with their designs, being functional but still being quite attractive.
Yeah,
Even if there isn't a lot of artwork or graphic
yeah.
design, that kind of thing going on.
They realize that there should be a minimum.
Yes.
Um,
Sure.
One other thing I just want to mention too about the pieces. I know it comes with a little like a bunch of chits that you can use for a lot of the cards. it's like when NATO is active, you can use this chit to say, hey, look, NATO's active. But I feel like after like your first game, you'll just use the card or something.
Yeah.
Like you just put the card out. And I feel like unless you are really at a premium for space, that those chips seem unneeded.
Yeah, I would agree. They don't really do much.
Yeah, especially because unsurprisingly, the chits are super small, so they have no information on them. And it's just like, NATO's active. What was NATO again? Oh, fuck, let me go pull out that card.
Yeah, so you might as well, you're probably going to have the card handy
Exactly,
anyway.
yeah. So I get why they had those to put it on your map just to make sure, but it seems unnecessary.
Right on. Moving on to rules and rules explanation. So I've never had to teach this game really. Like, I guess I kind of taught you, Jeff.
You did.
That was rough. I hadn't played in a while and didn't remember a lot, so we were constantly referencing the rules. But I think the fact that I'd played several times helped because I knew vaguely what was going on, and it was just minor details. Katie, have you taught anybody recently, or that you can think of? Like, the rules, I think it's not. If you know the game well, it's not very hard to teach. I don't think.
I think as well. I'll be honest. I've never actually taught Twilight Struggle to anybody. But from again experience of when I was learning it, and it was like I said earlier, my first actual GMT game that I owned or played, and the first kind of war style, because there's an argument if it's a war game or not. War style will go for now kind of game. And I think, again, that's something that GMT in particular are really good at. I know I talk about them a lot, but I'm allowed to. It's a GMT game. But the rule books are really clear, actually. And again, it's that functional thing. It can seem quite overwhelming, but they're so good at rule books and clearly labeling everything, and everything's got its own sections. So that even if you are a bit confused, you can reference it quite quickly, which I quite like.
Yeah. The other thing that it does that is really nice is it gives really solid examples throughout, and then towards the end, there's a 4 turns in depth. Like, US does this, plays this exact card. Here's how it plays. Here's what effects on the board. Like, walks you through a big sample round, so you can really kind of get an idea of how things are going to interact and how actual turns play out, which I think is really helpful. The only complaint that I really have about the rulebook that particularly comes to mind is this is one of those games where I really wish there was a rules reference that addressed how certain cards work in detail. Like, there's a couple cards that, like, most of them you can read the card and know exactly what it does and how it works, but there's a few of them that are just barely vague enough where you could interpret it one way or another. And it'd be nice to have a reference section that specified on some of those cards that you could find, like, BGG threads about, like, oh, hey, how does this card work exactly? Or how does this card compare with this card? Like, how do they interact together? Since that does become something that comes up as you play the game, is how certain cards, when you start having several of those cards out that are permanent effects, how they interact with each other.
I agree with that. There's a lot of cards, and I feel like the more you play the game, obviously, the more kind of you'll remember about the cards and what they do. But definitely, there's been times, even though I've played my copy so many times, that my cards are starting to turn white. They're black cards. And there's still times when I can't actually remember what a card does, so I definitely agree with that one.
Yeah, I think a lot of card-based games are, as long as they're relatively simple in their execution, and then it's all about how the cards do specific things. Yeah. Like, if you get to where it's like the game is complicated and then it also has a bunch of cards that do really specific things, that's where you get a little bit too much. So I'm glad that this strikes a good medium.
Right.
I think.
Yeah.
Because, it's just, you play a card for influence or the event, or to try a coup, or to realignment, or space race. That's it.
Yeah.
So I think I'm probably the only person. I am the person that has learned this most recently. Well, after all of you, because that's probably within the last year.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds about right.
And I think one thing that you probably need to say during rules and rules explanation to a new person is all these cards are unique. Some cards and strategies are some strategies are completely worthless. Because if you're looking at this board, look, it's like, oh, I have all these spots to go to. But then if the U.S. just dumps influence into Romania, they don't know that Russia just has a fuck you, all of that's gone card. So you really need to go over the cards with new players, because there are a lot of, like, and all that influence that you spent a long time doing and then we were fighting over,
Yeah.
I knew that I had a card, so I just made you waste all of that because I am now playing that card.
Yep. Let's just like earlier today, me and Paul were fighting over Egypt, and he as the USSR had 6 influence or 5 influence in Egypt, and I had the card. There's just like, well, we're gonna oust all the Soviets, so I just get 5 influence there.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a bunch of other way. Like, there's one for the USSR that's De Gaulle leads France.
Yep.
That wipes out a good chunk of the U.S. influence in France. So, like, if you're a U.S. player and you're new, and, you know, never mind that the new player should be playing Russia because Russia's got the advantage early. But, you know, if you don't know that, then you throw some influence into France early, and then...
Because France is important. It's in Europe.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, or like you said, like the Romania one's another because of the Romanian abdication.
Abdication.
Abdication. That's what it was.
Or Fidel, or
Fidel in Cuba. Like, there's a bunch of them that just are, you know, either replace all of your opponent's influence with your own, or just wipe theirs out entirely.
And I think it's really important to let the new player know that the cards in the beginning favor the USSR, and the cards in the end favor the United States. Because, especially if you're playing United States, like, you get your first hand of cards, and you're like, oh God. Everything is Soviet. Everything I do is just lets them do everything.
Decolonization.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You know, and that's one of the things that is interesting to me in this game. Like, I've been looking a little bit like for official tournament play and stuff. Like, it's not uncommon for at the beginning of the game, the U.S. to get spotted like 2 or 3 points because of how heavy that early Russian advantage is.
Yep.
You know, and if you can draw out the game, it shifts.
Yeah.
But, you know, this isn't a game that regularly goes to 10 rounds. Like, usually one of those other ending conditions that you talked about, like somebody hitting 20 points, somebody, you know, bottoming out the DEF CON, or there is a card in there at some point where it's like if you're up by like 9 points, you can give your opponent 8 points and then the game immediately ends. So as long as you have enough to give them but still have the most, then you win. I think it's also important to point out that the scoring in this is a tug of war.
Yes.
It's not like I get 5 points and then Zach gets 4 points, and so I have 5 and he has 4. It's if it starts at 0, and then if I earn 5 points, I go up 5, but then if he scores 4, it pulls back to 4, so I'm leading by 1 point.
Yep.
Because that kind of leads to some interesting ways that the points work in this, and it's harder to get to 20.
Yeah. Well, especially in the beginning of the game, you're like, all right, well, the USSR is probably going to just hang around like 10 points most of the time. So you just got to make sure that you just are never in a position where they get too many points that you can't come back from.
Right.
In my very first game that I ever played, I got to 17 points to the USSR. I did not win that game.
You got to 17 points, but then you managed to last until the end. Like, your first time playing against me, an experienced player, you took it all the way to the end of the game, which is really impressive.
Yeah. Having no idea what any of the cards were.
All I gotta say is I played Paul, and I let him be the USSR, and I lasted till turn 7 at least. So I was like, okay, this is I lasted through all of his bullshit advantage part. So, but
how did he end up winning your game today?
Well, so
did he have a date and just quit and left?
No. At the end of turn 8 or turn 6, he was at 19 points.
Oh, jeez.
And I looked at the time and I was like, oh, I should probably head towards recording. So I threw out a card that was basically give the USSR 1 point. But he also played the Southeast Asia scoring, which he would have gotten at least 1 point from that. So either way, he was going to win. But okay. I like that my number was up first. So I was like, fuck you, Paul. I make you win because of bullshit.
I got to go.
Yes. No, there are definitely some points where I was like, I was able to keep one part of Europe uncontrolled, one of the battleground ones uncontrolled by him. So it made sure that he couldn't win.
Just by domination?
Yeah, no, by control.
By control.
Yeah. He did that to Adrian.
So now let's officially move over to talk about gameplay.
Yeah.
Is it gameplay time?
This is like right where this game is amazing because all the gameplay stuff. So I mentioned during
That's right. This is right where that game is played.
I mentioned in that intro thing. I hate you, Zach. In the intro that the game takes, they list as like 120 to 160 minutes or 180 minutes. This game, if you're not paying attention,
it can be 30 minutes.
It can be 30 minutes or less. Like Paul won in the second round because, as Zach mentioned in the rules overview, if any country ever has complete control of Europe, which means you control all of the battleground countries in Europe, and you play the Europe scoring card, you just win automatically.
And you have to have one non-battleground one, but yeah.
How did you lose every battleground country?
He wasn't paying attention. When me and Adrian played once, he almost lost that to me as well. That he realized it like halfway through the rounds that I was going for that, and so he spent his entire time making sure one of the battleground states kept going back to him, and so I would turn it back, and then he would turn it back.
Yeah,
so he's really bad at Europe.
Yeah, that's my weakness. So I was even Russia too. I was USA in the first game where Paul beat me so quickly, and so like I was like, oh yeah, you can have some. And then, like, right at the end, he made a big push with, like, 2 cards that swung Europe entirely to him. And then I was like, uh-oh. And then sure enough, he's like, Europe scoring. And I was like, oh, no.
No.
Yes, that is definitely my weakness. I really, we've mentioned a little bit here that kind of that flow of Russia starting strong and then the U.S. gaining in the late game. I really like that because that mirrors really kind of history. There was a time when, like, Russia was serious competition. Like they got into space first, in multiple different parts of the space race. And, there was things like the Cuban Missile Crisis where they had ICBMs like right there on our coast. And it was incredibly tense. And then slowly the U.S. like pulled ahead in that kind of sort of war.
Mm-hmm. And it definitely... There are moments of tension in this game, especially when you play as the U.S. in the beginning, where you just get all these cards and you're just like, how am I supposed to deal with all this? How am I supposed to stop the USSR from expanding so much? When you look at your cards and you're just like, these are all of their cards. Yeah. Where are my cards at? Do I have any cards in this game?
There's almost no way for me to play that doesn't help them. Yeah. What the hell?
Yeah.
And then
definitely. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I want to talk. Let me talk.
Yeah. No, yes. Go.
Yeah, we really should have established on Wednesday's episode that you can just go like, guys, shut the fuck up. I need to say something.
Yeah.
I think that's why I love Twilight Struggle so much is, I know it's kind of reiterating what you've said, but it's the theme. It's so thematic, but in such a good way. Like, it's hard work. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but, it feels like, I wasn't there, obviously, but it does feel like how that probably would have been. And I usually play as the US, but when I have played as the USSR as well, that you can just feel that tension, that tug of war. And for some people, it might not seem that fun. I love the game, but it can be hard work, and it is, you're sat there and you are. I like it as well because you are putting yourself into those shoes and you are trying to think of the strategies and how you would actually have dealt with that at the time. So that's what I like about it. I'm just talking crap again.
No, and that's where this game was number 1 for so long. It's still the number 1 war game, because it does a fantastic job of bringing these mechanics that are, in some ways kind of abstracted, like the way they worked out coups and realignment attempts and things like that is kind of abstracted in the way the cards drive this game, but you still come away with this amazing like thematic tension, where you feel like 2 superpowers who are toying with the entire rest of the world to settle your little grudge match. And
well, that's one thing I sort of like too when when you do a coup at a battleground state, it brings it down on the DEFCON, and so it's like, oh, you can't do any more of those in Europe. And then Asia, and then the Middle East. And so you're always like, all right, well, I can't do it in Europe, so I got to find some other country to attempt a coup because I just need to do it. So,
somewhere in Africa.
Yep.
Yeah. And we didn't really mention, like, there is the required military ops track, which forces you to do things like coups and realignments. And, like, some cards will give you military ops.
Yeah.
But it forces you to do those things that create some of that tension, and especially when that DEFCON starts getting to, like, 3 and then to 2, and then you're like, is it going to go to 1? Are we going to go to war?
There's definitely a sort of thematic interestingness, keyword, that just like, it's like, oh, I'm doing the Indo-Pakistani war. I don't care what happens. I just need it to happen. And so I just like the fact that I'm like, I don't care about people dying. I just need to do this.
Yeah.
So fight.
Well, and some of them like for like the Indo-Pakistani war, like when you play that card, and it's a card that doesn't go like some cards when you play the event, like
it's gone for the rest of the game.
Yeah, like the Cuban Missile Crisis is a one-time use card.
There weren't multiple Cuban Missile Crises.
Right, like some of those revolutions and stuff are just one-time big swings in power.
Oh, here we go again.
Some of them, like the India-Pakistan war card, that just keeps going into the deck. So that card can get played 3 or 4 times, and it says, pick one of the countries to invade the other one. It does not matter what, it might matter based on who has control where, but it's...
Especially because those don't mess with the DEFCON level at all.
No.
So you're just like, oh, yeah, I'll totally play this. I don't care. If I win, sweet, I get victory points and I get influence. If I don't, nothing bad happens for me. Except I get 2, and it's not even bad, is I just needed 2 influence. So there we go.
Yeah.
Or not 2 influence, but 2 military ops. But yeah.
Right.
How much do we want to knuckle down on actual strategies? Because there are some pretty, like you were mentioning tournament play before. There are some steadfast, you should do these things.
Yeah.
On your setup on your first turn, and then certain areas that you want to control.
We can talk about it. I know for me, I'm nowhere near an experienced enough player to where I still have no idea what I'm doing half the time on my first turns. I know better than as the US to put influence in France, my initial influence placement.
Or the USSR to put influence in Japan.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
But aside from that, I know that there are other major strategies. Some people say Russia should be cooing their first action every turn. Always coup, always coup, always coup.
Your first action should be cooing Iran.
Yeah?
Yeah, your turn 1.
Yeah, I agree actually with that one.
Yep. Because if you lose Pakistan, then you can lose Asia to the US, unless you have Iran.
Interesting.
Yeah. I learned these things. And initial influence placement is super important, putting influence in Yugoslavia, Western Germany, Poland, and then on top of that, being able to get the right cards in your hand for your first actions and stuff, like decolonization, etc.
Yeah.
And then if the US player ends up with decolonization, being able to strategize exactly when you want to space race that card, because that's probably the USSR's most powerful card.
Yeah, fuck that card.
Yeah. Spacing cards at the right time, depending on when the shuffle is also a key strategy.
Yeah.
I had that card for a long, that was a card that I was holding on for 3 rounds in this first one. And then I ended up space racing it at the end of the 3rd round, and then I drew in the 4th round. That's when you add the mid war cards.
Yeah,
and I saw basically the United States version of that, and I literally laughed out loud. I wrote my cards, and I was like, "Are you gonna be fucking kidding me?"
I know, in the most recent game I played with Paul, another really good Russia card is the "We Will Bury You."
Yeah, fuck that.
And he got that card twice and was able to space race it, but I never got to play that card the whole time we played, which that's another one of Russia's more powerful cards.
Yeah. I think I definitely do like that when you play a card for the ops, if the event is the other player's turn, is the other player, then they get to use it so that you have a big strategy on when do you want to do that. Because I know there's been at least a couple where I've kept some where it says, oh, as the United States, it's oh, the Russians get to do these things for the rest of the round. And so it's I love using that card for the end of the round, because they're oh man, for all of your 0 turns, you get to do these amazing things.
Yeah, you get to use every card as one more ops value now that you've already played all of your cards.
Yep.
And it might not be a great strategy, but I'll be honest, that kind of drives most of what I do in Twilight Struggle. I don't want to play the cards that are going to help my opponent, so I just kind of dance around what I can do and how I can do it. And it's obviously not a strategy, but I think it's something that you do need to think about, because there have been games where I've been so focused on what I'm doing with the ops that I've even forgot about. And I know it sounds stupid to say, oh, you forgot about the events, but when you've got a strategy in place, I think you kind of have to be able to think on your feet as well, depending on what cards you get.
Yeah.
Stuff is going to happen, and you are going to screw yourself over.
Yeah,
lots of planning as well.
And I like that there are some cards that are you can't do NATO until the Warsaw Pact comes out. And I remember, I actually, as the United States, I had the Warsaw Pact be my headlines card, because I had NATO and then also something that played off of NATO in my hand, and I'm I need to get this shit out as soon as possible. so I can do all of these things. And so like Paul saw me do Warsaw. He's like, "Are you really? You're doing one of mine?" And I was like, "There's a reason."
I hope it works.
Yeah.
I think, talking about like strategy again, this is one of the discussions like Paul and I have. One of the things I struggle with is I'm always way too eager, I think, sometimes to spend even, like especially my own, whatever country I'm playing as, my country's events as the event, when I think there's a lot more power in doing ops a lot of the time and maybe not taking that event. Especially if you can take the ops and then not do the event, and then it goes back in the shuffle. So then maybe later Paul gets it. He can't do the event, and then when he does the ops, I get to do the event as a free action.
Yeah. There was one of the cards I actually had that was like draw a random card from the USSR, and then if it's an event, I can choose to play it or not. And I was like, well, this is a 3-ops thing, so I'm pretty sure you're going to want to play this, because it was about Middle Eastern scoring or something like that would help me out. So I was like, I could just let you play this, but then I was like, I don't want to give you those 3-ops anyway, so I'm just going to take it.
There's definitely like opening strategies, and like there's things you should do, like depending on what cards you have in your hand. But I think this is another one of those games, because of the way the cards come out and how much variability there is in that. Almost every game feels quite a bit different. Like the areas that you fight over, and when and where scoring happens in different parts of the world really cause the conflict to shift from game to game in different areas. Like there might be some games where like, South and Central America are like really contested, whereas another game like Asia is the one that's really contested. And I think that's really awesome. Europe is always very contested no matter what game.
Yep.
Yeah. The only other thing I want to touch on gameplay wise, I thought about saving it for final thoughts, but like it kind of ties into gameplay and like how we've talked about the way these mechanics bring all of the theme home. This is one of those games that like is fantastic, I think, for helping you to occasionally realize that like how shitty the Cold War was for everybody who wasn't the US and Russia. Like the US and Russia really never went to war. Like, yeah, there was tension and there's all kinds of things. And like, yeah, a lot of the people in the US and Russia, I'm sure, were concerned about like where the Cold War was heading and, is there going to be nuclear war? Are we all going to die? But there were a lot of other countries that, we overthrew governments and caused, all kinds of proxy wars and conflict.
Well, I mean, that's where like second and third world countries come from, because the second are like, the U.S. puppets and the USSR puppets, and the third war was ones that had nothing involved in either of them. So
and yeah, that's one of those things. Like playing this game a lot, it's hard not to sometimes feel that. Like we were talking about the India-Pakistan thing, like how cavalier we are talking about that because we're playing a game. But if you stop to think about like the mechanics behind why that card exists, and the rule book it has the background for all the cards that explains like kind of what was going on in the Cold War and why that card exists in the game. And
yeah, I know Paul, when I was playing with him earlier, he was actually saying like that's the first rule book like reference thing where I actually read from cover to cover, because it had information on all the cards and all the events that happened and stuff like that. So I think it's cool of them to include all of that.
And yeah, it really brings home like the way, I was born right at the very, very back end of the Cold War, so I never experienced it, but
except as a baby.
Yeah.
I faintly remember the Berlin Wall coming down. I was like 4.
I definitely don't remember.
I remember my parents watching it on TV.
Yeah. But I remember like at one point, in my dumb high school years, I was very argumentative and would like always play devil's advocate. And I don't remember how the conversation came up, but somehow I ended up like trying to make the argument like, oh, well, communism seems great on paper and like, oh, it works good in theory, blah, 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 blah. And my grandpa like lost his shit. Like it was the maddest I've ever seen him. Like, because he had all these like lingering holdovers from the Cold War.
Yeah.
And how much animosity there was between Russia and America.
Yeah. So was it communism? Really?
Tying into that. I'm sorry.
No, go for it. Go for it.
I want to speak, guys. Come on.
There you go. Yes. I didn't hear a fuck, but otherwise that was okay.
Fuck.
There we go.
I think as well, yeah, because I think, when did it end? Was it
1989? Was when the Berlin Wall fell, and which
is commonly considered the end of the Cold War.
Yeah.
So I was born in 91, so I missed it, obviously. But I think it's not necessarily kind of gameplay, but I agree with you on. I've learned, and I don't know what this says, but I've learned everything so much more than I could have by researching the Cold War, by playing this game. I think it does such a good job at that as well. I know you've just said that, but I want to reiterate that and emphasize like how historical, I can never say that word, how accurate it is. And also it's something that might not necessarily come up in day-to-day board gaming or Euro games, but I play a lot of war games, and some of the subjects can be quite sensitive. You know, people have lived through these things, and people may still be recovering or may still thinking about these things. And the way that GMT and have, well, not just GMT, but the way this game has been designed and published, it's actually really elegant and it's tasteful in what it does as well. And I just wanted to make a point of that for people that do care about that kind of stuff, because yes, it is a game, but to some people, it isn't a game, like you were saying. And actually, Twilight Struggle does a really good job of portraying it in a tasteful way where you are actually going to learn some stuff. And I really like that about the game as well.
Yeah.
And a lot of these,
if that makes sense, you know, I can't really get my words out, but I just think it's really sensitive with what it does.
yeah,
No,
because a lot. I mean, this game has late war. Late war goes up to 89. Like that was what 27 years ago.
Yeah.
There's people that lived through that, knocked that wall down, literally.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, and it is like even a lot of the events that you know take place even necessarily before that, like some of the things like the U.S. overthrowing Tehran, like that is something that has repercussions in like the world today. Like a lot of things that happened in the Cold War and the way that the U.S. and Russia manipulated governments all around the world is still very actively influencing not just those two countries, but all countries today. And I agree, Katie, like it does a great job in this of it doesn't point fingers. Like it's not like, ooh, Russians were the bad guys and the US were the good guys. Like it shows like that both sides did really kind of terrible things. And at the same time, like it can help you maybe understand, like if you play as Russia and like you see some of the things the US does and the actions they take, you can understand maybe why the Russians were tense and took some of the actions like, oh shit, the US is really encroaching and like we feel threatened. We need to push back. And I think it does a great job of kind of humanizing that entire thing a little bit.
There's definitely a lot of insight to what actually happened.
Right.
Instead of just what you might read about. And I've heard many people that have played this game that they've learned so much. And that's quite rewarding and quite a nice thing to say about a game as well. Being able to take the history away from it as well as being a really good game.
Right. Well,
tear down this wall.
Pretty nice card.
Yeah,
It's a good card.
Thanks, guys.
I haven't really seen many late war cards.
But yeah. Anything else anybody wants to touch on for gameplay about how it plays or what you think about gameplay or anything like that?
There are some dice in this game.
There are, yes.
When you do a coup
or
realignment, you might have to roll some dice. My first game, that I have referenced multiple times with Adrian, I kept trying to do those, and my dice were just pure fucking garbage.
Yeah. That blue die is a piece of shit.
Yeah.
Every single time I needed I did 4 space race. No, I was still in that beginning space. Because every single time it was a 4. Fuck you, dice. 6. All right, well, fine. Fuck you again.
Yeah. I do like that it's not often that the dice, like the space race is one of the few areas where it's like the equivalent of like a pass-fail.
Yeah.
And it's different amounts at different times. Like sometimes it's 1 through 4 succeed. Sometimes it's 1 through 3.
Yeah.
Most of the rest of the time, like coups and things, it's the outcome is going to be more based upon where you're cooing and what card, like how many ops you're spending on the coup. And then the dice roll will just determine whether or not you take take away their control or whether you then also gain control. Right. How swingy that shift is.
Right. Sometimes you can put like maximum ops and then you roll a 1 and then it's like, well, nothing.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, you can definitely still get fucked by the dice occasionally.
Yeah. So as to curtail off of that, do you think the randomness of the die, or specifically just how you get your cards, do you think that is it too much, or is it like a reasonable amount? Or
Well, so for the cards specifically, I think that the mechanic of when they use your card for ops, you get to do the action. Like, that helps balance a lot of that.
the other person gets fucked as much as often as you do.
Yeah, because you'll be like, especially, there's times, that you really don't want to use that. Like, you'd rather discard that card and do nothing, but you can't. So it's like, all right, well, you get to do this awesome op, or awesome event, but at least I'm going to get to do ops. And then when you play it like that, you choose which happens first.
Right.
So you can be like, well, let me do my ops so I can hopefully counteract the event that I know is coming because of this card.
Yeah.
Or vice versa. Be like, all right, well, do the event because then I know my ops can hopefully, how you resolve the event will affect how I spend my op.
There's enough ways to sort of mitigate it, and
Yeah.
also because you can choose when you play it in the rounds.
Yeah.
Okay.
The dice are a little bit more problematic for me, just because you can get on some real bad streaks where they don't go your way at all. But again, it's coups and realignments, although they are a very important tool in the game. More of the game happens, I feel, when I've played in other places. And it's easier to just be like, well, I'm not going to coup a stability 4 country. And it makes sense thematically. That's the other big thing. Like, it's really hard to coup a country with a stability of 4 versus a country with a stability of 1, which, well, the 1 is a less stable country. It's easier to shift the power around.
Good luck cooing the UK as the USSR.
yeah, it's not going to happen.
I'm sure it's happened sometime, somewhere in the world. Someone has played a game where they cooed the UK.
It's very unlikely, but yes, I your point is well taken. So yeah,
They must have been playing very poorly.
Yeah, the other person was playing very poorly.
Yes.
But they don't, to answer your question, no, neither the randomness of the cards or of the dice in this particular game come across as game breaking for me personally.
Okay.
Mr. I hate randomness.
That's your name.
That is my name.
Yeah.
I hate randomness.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that, Katie?
I agree. I think, again, in some games, I'm really bad at dice rolling. Like, I just can't do it. It never works in my favor. But I keep talking about theme, but it's such a big thing in this game. It just fits in really well with how it probably would have been. Like, you don't know what's going to happen. And so, even though you can have strategies, I did just explain this really, but you can have strategies. There are going to be times you know exactly what you're doing. You are going to have to think on your feet as well, and you are going to have to react to what somebody else is doing, and that would have been very fitting for what was happening at the time. And I think when you first start playing the game and the first few games, it can feel really luck-based. I will say that. For me, it did, because I didn't really, like I said, even now I still don't know some of the cards, I'll admit. But when I first started playing, it did feel quite luck-based. But as I got to learn through that learning curve of how to actually play the game, I could start to see, I think you can kind of see patterns as well. And you kind of know, you kind of know what the cards are going to give. And, in that situation, I know that I can coup, or I can do this, or I know next game I need to start planning better. So I think it's just about, for anyone that wants to try it or has maybe only played a few games, can feel quite luck-based at first, but that does leave, well, I guess that's like any game, the more experience you have with it as well.
Right.
You can feel where the tide is going, where the currents are.
Yeah, you can kind of feel how it's going. Not always, obviously, because with any card-driven game, you've got to play what's in your hand. But it's just being able to see the patterns or react, being able to know how to react to things, rather than just think, oh no, I don't know what to do in this situation.
Yeah.
I know. Earlier, I was like, well, I am fucked in the Middle East, so I'm not going to really focus on that anymore.
And especially
Goodbye, Thailand.
after you've played a few times and you get an idea of what, especially that first phase, the early war, that deck of cards, every card in the early war deck will be like come into play at some point. Like, They might not actually get played because somebody might burn it on a space race or find some other way to discard one of them. But they're all going to end up in somebody's hand at some point. So and especially that's important for scoring. And that's something where I need to be better about Europe scoring, because I know Europe scoring is going to get played in one of those first early war rounds.
By the third round.
Yeah. And so you need to be aware of that all of that scoring is going to happen.
Yeah.
And then after that, once you get into the second and the mid and late war, and you're shuffling in so many more cards, then there gets to be a little bit more ambiguity where one might just not make it through the deck. But every one of those early war cards will at some point end up in somebody's hand. Where it goes from there, who knows? But and that's something else that I think is easy to miss when you're a new player and contribute to that feeling of like, holy shit, this game's really random and swingy. It's like, well, you just didn't know that these cards were coming at some point, no matter what.
Yeah. Pro tip, twilightstrategy.com. Fantastic for all of your card learning, early strategies, mid-game strategies. Important countries from either side. I used the crap out of that.
I should probably look into that.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
And it also has all the history. It's got like a wiki page for each card, so it has a lot of the more history stuff about each card and the events that were around those cards.
Right on. What was that one more time, Jeff?
twilightstrategy.com.
Cool.
Yeah. I used it a lot when I was in Chicago this last weekend because I bought the app and played the crap out of the app. And the AI is real fucking hard. And I needed all the help I could get. I used max handicap a couple times and still got crushed. It's easier playing against other people. They make mistakes. Computers don't make mistakes.
No. Right on. Well, I think it is a good time to go into our final thoughts. Jeff, how about you start?
As I have started to lean more towards two-player asymmetrical games or two-player competitive, that this game might be more leaning to rather than asymmetrical. I love this game. Zach gave me his copy for Christmas last year. It is definitely one of my favorite games, period, especially as I've been playing it more and more recently for the review. I like the app a little better just because it goes shorter.
How long does the game take on the app?
30 minutes, 45 minutes.
Yeah.
But, I mean, depends on how quickly you get crushed, but you'll get into mid-game within about 45 minutes.
Right.
And a tabletop can take, hour and a half, 2 hours with experienced players.
Right. And the app isn't going to forget to
do stuff.
Yeah, to do stuff. So.
And it's a lot easier to like reset and just be like, well, that's went to garbage. And it also has like, you can play against other real people on it as well. But yeah, Twilight Struggle is a fantastic war game, and I clearly need to play way more GMT games.
Yeah.
Yes, you do.
And they have many.
Yeah, they do. So for me, this is, as I mentioned, this was one of the games that I played fairly early on in my experience into the hobby, and I loved it then. And then, I loved it when I taught Jeff, probably about a year or so ago, and then getting to play it a few more times again for this review is just yet another reminder for me about how good this game is. It's totally right in my wheelhouse. I like two-player games. I like the tug and pull of this game. I like the interesting decisions, like, that dilemma of, oh shit, I've got 4 of my opponent's cards in my hand. How, like, which ones do I let them get to use? Because they're going to get to use some of them. And making those tough decisions is something I really look for in games, and this delivers it thoroughly. And then, like I mentioned, I really appreciate how this game does a fantastic job of bringing home a lot of the realities of the Cold War. And,
You learn something, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's something you don't get a lot in board gaming, and it's really nice to see it done so well in Twilight Struggle.
I would not known of anything about the Romanian abdication had I not played this game.
Yeah, I really like Twilight Struggle. I think it's a fantastic game. I think it's long time number 1 spot and currently number 3 are still very well deserved for this game.
Clearly, fuck Pandemic Legacy.
Yeah. Zach?
So you know what I don't like doing before a board game? Homework.
Right.
And that's what it seems like I have to do in this game. Specifically, like when you guys were talking about the looking up strategies for this game earlier, or learning the cards so you know what to plan for and stuff like that. I do not like doing that at all. I almost actively try to not remember any cards when I'm playing different games and stuff like that. So right now I rate this game a 7 out of 10 or something on Board Game Geek, which basically for me is it's a fine enough game. It's just not for me.
Okay.
Because I really don't like that if you're not playing someone at the same skill level as you, like if you're playing as a new person, if you're playing against someone who has memorized the cards and stuff like that, or if you choose not to memorize the cards and you're playing against someone who has, then
you will be crushed.
You'll be crushed. And so like there are a lot of times when me and Paul were playing where it's just like I'd done some stuff in France or something. He's like, oh yeah, I had this card. You know, you clearly forgot about this card and clearly you forgot about this card. I was like, no, I just didn't want to learn those cards. And
I do have to say I'm usually like that with a lot of games.
Yeah.
Like Food Chain. Fuck Food Chain.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't want to learn strategies to be good at those games, but this one is one that's hooked me.
Yeah, this one did not hook me. I've played a couple of the GMT games, and I just, for whatever reason, they just don't. When I originally heard the game, I was like, oh cool, you get to play in the Cold War, and then I was like, I don't really care about playing in the Cold War.
Fair enough.
Same with the Vietnam War or a lot of these other ones that just playing in a war doesn't hook me, and not in any sort of like hippie way or anything like that. It doesn't interest me. And so I can see the merits in the game. There are a lot of things I do like. I do like that you have to, like, if you're playing a card of the ops and it's the other person's event, and you're like, oh god, like I like that. I did like that stress that you get from the you open a hand of your opponent's cards and you're like, oh god, what the fuck am I supposed to do this round? I liked a lot of that, but I don't know, it just, a lot of the game felt sort of tedious for me, and like all the things you have to move, you're like, oh, I got to move these things up here, you know, I got to do the influence, and then not knowing the cards, a lot of those things can be for naught. And so this game just isn't for me, and that's why I'm okay not playing it again, probably. I don't know, we'll see. But I have no interest, I have no burning desire to reignite the Cold War, so.
Fair enough, and there's nothing wrong with that. Katie, how about you, as the guest of honor, bring us home?
Oh, thank you. I can speak.
Yes.
I'm just playing. Everything that you've mentioned. I love how much historical detail does go into the game. We've spoken about themes so much, I'm going to leave that there. I think I can't speak. The replayability of this game for me is one. I think it's a game that I could and will probably play forever. There's so much replayability for it for me. Different cards, different strategies. It is a complex game, but there's a lot of variance and there's a lot of different things you can do in different ways, which you can attempt to win. I never win. I'm not very good at it, but I really enjoy it. And I love card-driven strategy games anyway, so that's 100% my cup of tea. But again, drawing cards, you don't necessarily always know what you're going to get, and being able to think on your feet and react to different situations that might come up. And yeah, it's one of my favourite games ever. I haven't played it in a while. I probably shouldn't say that. But yeah, it's definitely in my top 3 ever board games. I think though, as Zach was kind of touching on, think if you are a more experienced player and you're playing with someone that's quite new, you might not necessarily get as much game out of it, if that makes sense. You might have to play a bit soft, or if you've played the game 20, 30, 40, whatever, how many times, you are going to have an advantage, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. You can say that with any game, to be honest. Yeah, I really enjoy it. I've got the app, but haven't played it yet. So maybe that's where I need to go next, if it's a lot quicker, and maybe we can have a game online.
And you can totally crush me.
Yeah.
I'm really bad at this game, but I still love it and still go back and want to play it all the time, which is a merit in itself, I guess.
That still doesn't mean you're not going to crush Jeff.
Oh, yeah. No.
All right, let's do it then. Let's see if I can actually finally win. Twilight Struggle.
We'll get to late war and you'll win by score.
Right on. Well, that wraps up the main part of the review here.
It's real good.
If you are interested in picking up Twilight Struggle following this review, it is super available pretty much all over the place, and it's going to cost you somewhere in the $30 to $40 range, depending on where exactly online you go for it, which is a great price for a game like this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in a world where the board game is going to cost $60 to $120, and you can get Twilight Struggle for $30 to $40. That's fantastic.
I mean, if you want the crazy, awesome, amazing deluxe edition, be prepared to spend at least $400 to $500.
Oh yeah, with all the really nice wood parts and
Yeah,
everything.
that looks real good.
Oh my god, I want it.
Sexy.
Is
Yeah.
it worth $400 though?
Oh god, yeah.
Yes.
Probably.
Yes, 100%.
Bullshit, Paul. Spend your money.
I can go buy wood at Home Depot. So I don't know.
Just laser etch all the pieces.
Yeah.
Make your own.
Moving on, we do have a response over on our Board Game Geek Guild thread that Zach put up for this episode.
Yes,
Zach,
I did.
You ready for that one?
Yeah. So this is from Derek. Twilight Struggle is obviously a masterpiece game due to its high ratings, thousands of reviews, and years in the top position of BGG. The board and components are great, and it has high replayability. The only bad thing about the game is how punishing it is for new players if they're matched up against a veteran. It's essential that if you play it 3 or more times and you're teaching a new person, that you pull out some of the cards from each period and discuss them with your opponent. It's not fun to crush someone that doesn't know what they're doing unless it's real politics. However, the game is truly amazing and will probably spend another 10 years in the top ratings. Can't wait to hear what you all guys have to say. I see what you fucking tried to do there, Derek, and I'm not falling for it.
You definitely said y'all guys.
And I said I wouldn't say that, so.
Yeah.
I think that's my main problem with it is that I am not a fan of it when a new person is playing against a veteran and it's just like no matter what you're going to get crushed because you just don't know, especially because these are card based, that he's like you don't know that there's a card that's going to fuck you over by doing that. And so
all right, Timmy, this is the Grandmaster of chess. This is your first game of chess. Good luck.
yes.
It's a steep learning curve, but it's so rewarding once you do kind of have an idea of what you're doing, I think. And I guess, obviously, because I love the game, I'm going to defend it.
Right.
But so it's, of course that's going to happen, but there's so much, it's so rewarding once you can play and you are starting to, again, I don't win it, so I don't know what I'm saying. But once you start to kind of get a grip of what's going on, and can become immersed in the theme. You know, that could be said for any game. It's just about doing your homework, doing your research beforehand, which I know you don't enjoy, but I quite like that about a game.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, for me, like, I'm kind of the opposite way, you know, in that I like a game where the more experienced player is probably going to dominate because that means that, like, even as a new player getting in, like, yeah, you know, somebody experienced teaches me, and yes, I'll probably lose, you know, but then that just means that, you know, it's like opening up like this world.
Yeah.
Like there's so much depth for you to explore. There's so much strategy for you to learn. There's so much more to this game than you get in that first play. And that's what draws me into these games and keeps me coming back and wanting to play them over and over. So that, like, I don't do a lot of strategy reading. Like I fell down a wormhole for that with Food Chain, but I haven't done that yet with Twilight Struggle, and I don't think I will. I want to learn the game from just playing it over and over and like learning the game through the experience of the game itself. So, but yeah. That brings it all to a close there. If you would like to participate in our BGG review discussion threads, jump over to our Board Game Geek Guild number 2731, where Zach does these awesome posts with a little bit of flavor thrown in for the game we're reviewing. If you wanted to email us, you could do that.
Emails at milehighgameguys.com.
You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram /MileHighGameGuys. And you can always get a hold of us on Twitter. I tweet under @MHGameGuys.
I am Zach_MHGG.
And I am Jeff_MHGG.
And last but not least, you can also join our Slack channel, which there's a link for in the show notes over at milehighgameguys.com. And then you can enjoy Zach taking really, really shitty photos of me while I'm recording an episode.
Well, you weren't the focus of that picture, Adrian.
Yeah, I know, but I was still front and center in that photo.
Yeah.
Anyway,
It's not that I took a shitty picture of you. You just looked shitty in a photo.
Correct. You're not wrong. Katie, would you like to plug your social media and stuff?
Yes, I know what it is now. So my blog is www.katiesgamecorner.com. I didn't need to say the www. bit, but there you go. On Twitter, I'm Katie's Game Corner, and Facebook, also Katie's Game Corner.
Yep. And Katie is also a member with us of Punchboard Media, home to a whole lot of awesome content creators, bloggers, video people, podcasters, reviewers, all of the above. And so, be sure to go check out everybody else from Punchboard Media over at punchboardmedia.com. As always, I've been your host, Adrian.
I am still Zach.
And I'm General Secretary Jeff.
And thank you for joining us, Katie. It has been an absolute pleasure having you on the show.
Yes, thank you.
Very much so.
Thank you for having me. Thank you very much.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. It's the first ever kind of, I guess words. Give me a second. What am I trying to say?
You mean blue? You said white.
I'm pretty sure they're white.
Well,
Wait.
blue outlined. Okay. Is the red one solid?
What?
Yeah, I'd swear that I.
No, the stars are white or red.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
In your fucking face.
Okay.
You communist piece of shit.
Punchboard Media, where we all
bring something
to the table.
pull up a chair
At punchboardmedia.com.